Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today. We've got a great webinar coming up, which I'm sure we'll all enjoy. And so appreciate you all taking the time out of the day to join us. In just a moment, I'm going to hand over to Dino, who's going to talk us through row-level data security in Looker. We touched on this a little in a webinar right at the beginning of the year when we talked about, more general security policies that you could put in place in Looker, but really didn't go particularly deep into row-level data security. And so I'm excited to have him talking to us today about really in detail about how you can implement this, both for internal usage, if that's what you've got, but particularly for when you've got consumption outside of your own organization and you need to make sure that you're only showing the right people the data that belongs to them, can be where this becomes really useful. And so he'll be talking us through that in just a second. Before he does, just want to highlight some of the webinars that we have coming up. If you haven't joined us before, we run these webinars every 2 weeks at exactly this time, 5 p.m. UK time on a Wednesday, 12 Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific. And they are really just about getting the Looker community together, helping us all skill up, providing a place where people can talk about interesting things that are happening in Looker. Sometimes presented by us, the team at Spectacles, but often we work with our partners, like the folks at Datatonic, to bring some of their expertise in for these webinars. So if you're interested in signing up for that one in the future or any of our other ones, you can head to spectacles.dev/webinars. You can also watch all of our prior videos there. So I think we've done about 17 or 18 of these now. And so I'm sure there's a couple topics that will be of interest to all of you. So if you head there, you can see those as well. Final thing from me before I do hand over is we run all of our Q&A and discussion around these webinars in our Slack community. And so I've just dropped a link in the chat for the community itself and for the name of the channel. We'd love for you to join us there. Head over there and let us know where you're calling from today. And also, as you have questions that you want answered that come up during the presentation, drop them in there and I'll pull them from there for the Q&A towards the end of today's webinar. On that note, that's it from me. I'm going to hand over to Dino, and it's his show from here. So over to you.
Thanks a lot, Dylan. Thanks, everybody, for joining. I'm going to share my screen now, and we'll get into the meat of it. I believe it's this one here. Yeah, perfect. All right. So as Dylan said, we will talk about implementing row-level security in Looker. Just a bit about myself first. I'm head of delivery for Datatonic Americas. I've been in the modern data space for a good 10 years now, including 3 years as a consultant for both Montreal Analytics, which merged recently with Datatonic, and I've personally implemented over 25 Looker in over 25 companies. Have delivered Looker boot camps to hundreds of developers and analysts. So love Looker. I'm a huge advocate of Looker. I think it's the best. Let's talk a bit about how we implement row-level security. So we'll start a bit just with a recap of the Looker security architecture. Then we'll start diving progressively deeper into data access security, and then finally talking about implementing row-level security, a bit of when to apply these things, how to apply these things. We'll have a bit of a demo in LookML. I'll show you a few things there. And then we'll just have a bit of a recap. Hopefully that makes sense to everybody. Let's start. So, and by the way, before we get into it, just a very, very brief obligatory shout out to Datatonic. We are a leading global cloud data and AI consultancy. We've delivered over 700 data and AI projects. That's a lot of that is Looker as well. We're a 4 times Google Partner of the Year recipient. Our specializations cover data analytics, machine learning. We're also Google authorized training partners. We've done a lot of work with a lot of clients in the data analytics, the analytics engineering, the data engineering, the BI, and the ML AI workspace. So we love Google. We love working with data, of course, and we really cover the end-to-end solution when it comes to providing data services to clients. You see here that we're a huge Google partner, but we have other areas other tools that we like as well. You'll see across the data stack, and basically we provide end-to-end solutions to our clients. We allow them to leverage their data assets to achieve their goals, whether that's growth, cost reduction, operational efficiencies. We work end-to-end from like I was saying, data engineering, analytics engineering, BI, AI, ML, we cover it all. All right, enough of that. Let's talk about Looker and data security. We'll cover the overall security architecture for Looker. Starts, of course, with the user logging in. Authentication and authorization is a big piece of Looker security, of course, and Looker supports various methods of user authentication, including single sign-on, LDAP, Google OAuth, etc. And basically, with Looker administrators can control user access by defining specific roles, permissions, access to content, and access to data, as you see here. Let's talk about the three components there. Feature access. So feature access, in a nutshell, is really what can a user do in Looker? What are they allowed to do in Looker? Things like viewing data, exploring data, downloading data, things like that. There's a lot more functionality. There's a lot more permissions in there. It's quite granular, but things like that. Like essentially, what it boils down to is what can a user do? What is a user allowed to do in the Looker UI? So that's one thing, and that's controlled via roles and permission sets. We won't get too much into that, but it's good to know. So that's one way of securing the access to information here. And then we've got content access. So content in this particular case, we're talking about dashboards and looks mostly. Dashboards and looks are organized into folders, as you may know. And that's where the content access comes into play. It's access to the folders and what a user can do in that folder. Can they edit? Can they delete? Can they just view the contents of that folder? Or can they not even see that folder at all? So access to content is another cornerstone of Looker security. And finally, the data access portion. And that's where, it's highlighted in yellow. That's where we're going to focus the rest of our time today. But essentially, what does data access mean? In this case, it means having mechanisms in place across, like up and down the whole structure of the data, across all the levels of the data, so that you can control as an administrator what data a user can see and query, essentially. All of that, of course, Looker connects to a data warehouse. It does so securely, of course. It does so using encryption protocols, SSL, TLS, all that fun stuff. But it also provides data encryption. Looker also encrypts the data in flight and at rest between the warehouse and Looker, of course. So very, very securely accessing data from the Looker perspective. And then behind the scenes, of course, Looker has system activity logs, where as an administrator you can view who's doing what, when, and how, and if there's any breaches in security there. So quite a robust security architecture. But as I said, we're going to focus mostly on that data access bit. So let's take a bit of a deep dive into that data access portion. So as I said before, you can apply security measures, data access security measures, across different levels of the data structure, if we want to call it that. So if we look at the top level, you can apply model level security in Looker. That's usually, a model, as you know, is equivalent to more or less a database connection. And basically what you can do is you can allow certain users to see certain models or not see certain models, right? And that's done through the admin panel in Looker. It's done through by creating a model set and then assigning that model set to a user role. So you can control at the model level. So basically every explorer that will be defined in that model will be controlled by this particular security mechanism. So that's very, very high level, very, and that covers the models. Now, taking a step below that, we can be a little more granular, and we can apply data access policy to explores and joins. So you're controlling access to a particular explorer, or even more granularly, a join in one of those explorers. That is done directly in LookML. And that is done through the use of user attributes, and access grants. We're not going to cover that here, but you can control explore view, access to explore, and access to certain joins using lookml and user attributes and access grants. Similarly, you can do the same for columns. So in this case, you're controlling access to a particular dimension or measure in a view, again, done directly in the lookml, and again, leveraging user attributes and access grants. We're not going to cover that here. We're talking about row level security. So row level is you're really controlling access to rows in a particular Explorer. That's a very, very important distinction there, because you're applying this security for a particular Explorer. So it's not at the view level, it's at the Explorer level. So if a view is exposed in two Explorers, you will have to apply this security policy, in other words, to each Explorer that view is exposed in, but we'll get into that in a second. So basically what you're doing in the lookml layer is applying at the Explorer a filter that can leverage user attributes to make it a bit more dynamic, and we'll get into that in a second here. But essentially, you're putting a filter on an Explorer so that a particular user, or all users, depending on what you want to do, will only access a subset of what's really sitting in that table in the data warehouse. So you can apply security at different levels, but we're going to focus on the row level security here. So how do we implement row level security? Well, there's two ways. First, we have to think about, okay, well, what type of filtering are we looking here? Are we looking for a blanket filter that will be applied across all users? Then we'll call that, I'll call that for the sake of this presentation, a static filter. Or if we want a filter to be, the filter logic to be a little more user specific, or take into consideration what I like to call like a bit of the user context, then we'll apply what I'm calling here a dynamic filter. So static filter, very easy to implement. It's a one-step thing. There are a few parameters that you can use to apply this filter, again at the Explorer level, but it's a one-step thing. You define it, thank you very much. It is applied to everybody equally across all your user base, regardless of who they are or what they should have access to. That's the static filter. The dynamic filter, as I said before, will leverage user attributes and will be a little more dynamic in nature, because it will take, like I said, that user context. So if a user should see, if a user belongs to a user group X, should only see like a certain subset of the data, versus a user being part of group Y and should see a different subset of the data, you can use user attributes and user attributes value to then apply that user-specific filtering to the Explorer, and we're going to get into that. We're going to see some examples of that as well. So the static filter, easy to implement, but you sacrifice a bit of flexibility and a bit of user-specific dynamicity, if you want to call it that. Whereas on the dynamic side, it's a few extra steps, not that difficult to implement really, but you do have to think about what your user attributes are, what the values are, how do you apply them to users or groups. So there's a bit of thinking to be done beforehand, but not a difficult topic. And then, of course, once you apply it, it works across all the content that touches that specific Explorer. And you'll see an example of that very, very soon. So what's the difference really? Well, the static row level security, not really a security measure in and of itself. I mean, you can use it for security, but usually what it is, it's, as I said, it applies that same filter logic to all users. And one of the typical use cases is like, filtering out test records, for example, or, filtering out, old records or specific dates, or, things like that. And they're best used for that's a static filter is best used for internal users. You can use it for external as well, but usually it's an internal use case. And it's really just best for controlling how much data is being fetched by the query by default, right? And there are a few ways to do that, and I'll go through the different ways of doing that. On the dynamic side, though, it applies a specific logic for a specific user or specific users. The filter is quote unquote, like, well, asterisk, always hidden from the user. It is immutable, whereas static, it can be immutable, but it can be modifiable, right? I say always with an asterisk because if your users have access to the SQL that is being generated by Looker to run the query, you will see the conditions in the SQL statement. You will see them being built up. But if you don't have that exposed, the user won't know that stuff is being filtered. But it's great for hiding data based on group membership, as I was saying, or values, or for different user contexts, as I was saying, like in my example here, in the example use case that we have, users are split across regions. So if you think like, there's some sales reps that are part of, region X and some sales reps that are part of region Y, you don't necessarily want that, group group X to see group, region Y data and vice versa. You can use this dynamic filtering for that purpose. And it's great, as Dylan mentioned before, it is great for embedded analytics where you're exposing your data to multiple clients. And of course, you don't want client X to see client Y's data. So this is a great use case for that. Let's get into it. Let's see it in practice here. Oops. Oh, I hope I can stay logged in. It's working. Okay, perfect. So I have now, I've gone to my order items Explore here. And if those of you who are familiar with Looker, developing in Looker, you'll know that opening up multiple tabs is the best thing to do. So I have my LookML here, and I have this sales highlight dashboard here that is built off that Explore, that order items Explore. And I also have the Explore itself. We'll get into that. And I have, and so let's get into it. So let's talk about static filtering. Static filtering, I'm going to show you 3 ways of doing it. It starts with the most rigid way of implementing a static filter at the Explore, going progressively into a less rigid way. So the most rigid way is a filter that is applied always, it is immutable, and the user doesn't even see what's going on, right? And that's with the parameter called either SQL always where or SQL always having. Now, SQL always where is used for filtering on a dimension. SQL always having is filtering on a measure, right? So think of, like, again, in SQL, it's the where clause and the having clause. So that's why you have those 2 parameters. They're a bit different, but they essentially just filter on a clause, on a condition. And if I uncomment this particular one here, I hope my screen is, I hope it's big enough. Let me just make it a touch bigger. So here, what I'm saying is I have my order items. I really don't want to see any returned items. Like by default, I don't want to see that. So I've created a SQL always where statement that basically says, just give me the rows where is returned is no, right? And if I expose this clause and I just click on save, you'll notice here that I have 3.07 million in sales. If I refresh this, you'll notice that the number will drop a little bit. There aren't too many returned items in this data set, but you'll see that it's dropped a bit by around 30K or so, 25K. So that filter's working. And of course, I can do the same for a measure, right? So I'll use SQL always having. In my particular scenario here, let me just comment this one out. I have a SQL always having. I just want to see orders that have that are greater than $100, greater than or equal to $100 in total value. So I can have a SQL always having that is really a filtering on an aggregation. So that's why you have the SQL always having, but it'll essentially do the same thing. In fact, if I click on save here, you will notice that this changes as well in my the data that's being fed to this dashboard will be filtered out differently. And you'll see that it's slightly different. There is even less like orders that are less than $100. So you're not going to see a huge difference in the amount here, but the amount is different than the original unfiltered data set. So very, very rigid. This applies to everybody equally. There's no flexibility at all. So that's the SQL always having. Next in less rigid, but still somewhat rigid, is the always filter. This is still a static filter. I'm just going to uncomment that. And as you see, this filter, an always filter, basically applies the filter to the Explorer at all times, but the filter value, the value of the filter, can be modified by the user. So a little less rigid than the SQL always paradigm, but because the user, as I said, can modify the value here. So if I click on save and I go back, now this one I'm going to show you in the Explorer here. So if I just refresh my Explorer here to get the LookML, the new LookML, I'm just going to click on my order items, and I'm just going to add one field so that you can see how this filter is appearing in the UI. As you see here, that filter, let me go back to my LookML for a second. It's still a filter on order items is returned is no. So I don't want returned items in my data set. You will see that this filter here in the filter section of the UI is being represented by is returned field set to no. And you'll see here that it says required. Now it is the filter is required, but the value can change. So I can, as a user, I can set my I can set the filter value to yes instead of no. So it is modifiable to some extent by the user. So that's a little less rigid, but still rigid enough. The final, the least rigid of the static filters is what we call conditionally filter. Now let me talk you through the logic quickly here. So the parameter is called conditionally filter, and basically what we're saying is this is the filter we want to apply by default. So again, the usual order items is returned is equal to no, so no returned items in my return data set. But we're giving a choice to the user in this case where we're saying, look, you don't have to use that filter, but if you don't use this is return filter, you must use a specific filter that I'm telling you you have to use. So in this case, it is created date. So now if I save my LookML by exposing this conditional filter, and I go back to my Explorer and just do a quick refresh of that, you will see that my filter is different. It says order items return is still set to, well, no in this case, but it's got this little conditionally required comment here. And if I hover over that, it's saying the filter is required for at least one of these filters. So the is returned, which is there by default, or that created date. So again, it gives you the user a bit more flexibility while giving the developer or the administrator some power over what is being served to the user by default. So this is the least rigid of the static filter. So three ways to apply static filter: SQL always having, being SQL always where or having being the most rigid, always filter somewhere in the middle, and you've got this conditionally filter. So this really will just filter out and provide a subset of records to the user. Apply to all users equally, right? Nice, but what we want is a little more dynamicity. We really want to see what's, we really want to have user-specific filtering, and that's where the dynamic filters come in. So if you recall, the dynamic filter started with, I need to leverage a user attribute. So I have to define what that user attribute is. In our scenario here for the dynamic filter, let's think about a brand manager who we want to, basically we have a bunch of brand managers. This is an e-commerce business. We have a bunch of brand managers, and each brand manager is in charge of one brand, for example. And we don't want a manager from brand X to see data from brand Y, right? So we're going to control this. We're going to do a one situation where I am a manager for Calvin Klein, and I only want to see my Calvin Klein sales, right? So that's all I want to see. So we'll start by, what we want to do is, first of all, filter on, we're going to be filtering on brand name, right? That we're going to filter on the brand. So we'll create a user attribute to capture the value we want to use for filtering. So the first thing we're going to do is create a user attribute. And in this case, I've already created it. I've called it brand name. And I'll just edit it so you can see how it's created. So basically, I've created a user attribute called brand name. The label is whatever. I've called it brand name. Type is string because the underlying field that I want to filter is a string, right? So I'm going to define it as of data type string, and I've set it as advanced because you'll in a second I'll explain. You can define the visibility too. You can dictate what visibility the user has on this user attribute. So in this case, it's okay that they view what the value of this user attribute is, and I'm not really hiding any values. And this is where the advanced part comes in, because by default, if a user does not have a user attribute, a value defined for this user attribute, let's say for administrators or customer support, they should see all brands. By default, I've set the value of this user attribute to say you can see it all, right? You may in certain situations you may not want to do that, but in this case I wanted to do it that way. So I've set the user attribute. It's the shell essentially. It's the placeholder for the actual the value of the filter. So I've created my user attribute. Now I need to define some values of that user attribute. Now you can do it at the user level, and in some cases you may be very happy to do that, and it may be fine. But generally speaking, best practice is it's best to manage groups in Looker rather than individual users. Much easier to manage. It's a lot more for maintainability's sake. So I'm going to set a group value here because we may have more than one brand manager for Calvin Klein. So we may as well create a group for that. So basically what I've done is I've created a group, and I can do that in the admin panel again, in the group section there. Where did I overshoot it? Yes, over here. So I've created a group. I'm not going to click on it. I'll just stay over here. So there's a group name, and I'm setting a value for that group for this brand name user attribute. I'll set it to Calvin Klein, right? And the value is important because the value has to be written exactly the way it appears in the data, because essentially what's going to be happening is Looker will take this condition and basically insert it into the SQL statement. So the SQL statement has to be syntactically valid, and the value has to match what's in the data. So I've set my value to Calvin Klein, and now I've got a user attribute name, brand name, and for a particular group name called Calvin Klein, the value of this user attribute is set to Calvin Klein. The last thing we need to do is actually, well, one of the next thing we need to do is actually assign a user to this group called Calvin Klein, right? So I will do that. I will add myself to this. As you see, we have Calvin Klein, the Calvin Klein user group here, and we don't have any users in it yet. So I will click on Calvin Klein, and I will add a member. I will add myself. So now, by doing so, I am inheriting the value of this user attribute. And now for the user attribute brand name, my brand name user attribute is defined as is equal to Calvin Klein. So I've got all the background stuff done. Now what I have to do is apply the filter to my Explorer in my LookML. So I'll go back to my LookML, and I will get rid of this. I will comment out this conditionally filter. We don't need that anymore. And I will create this access filter. This is the parameter that you use to leverage user attributes in your filter to create a dynamic filter. So the parameter is called access filter. And there are two subparameters, field and user attribute. So the field is the field to which you want to apply the filter. So in this case, we want to apply the filter to the brand field in the products view. And the products view is a join down below here, as you see right there. So this has to be, the field has to be a fully qualified name. So you have to write it as, view.field, right? So in this case, it's products.brand. And where am I getting the value of my filter? Well, I'm getting it from the user attribute brand name. So that's how you set up the access filter for the Explorer to create this dynamic filter. So once I have this all set up, if I click on save, and then I go back to my dashboard here, sorry, and I just click on refresh, you will see that the total orders is going to drop dramatically. Right? I'm down to 43,000 here. I'm down to 43,350, which is really all the sales, all the records for Calvin Klein, all the order items for Calvin Klein. So now this dashboard it doesn't say Calvin Klein anywhere, but I know that I'm a Calvin Klein user. I will only see Calvin Klein data in here. And if somebody else is set up under a Levi's group, and the Levi's the brand name user attribute is set to Levi's, they will only see Levi's data in here, for example. So instead of creating like a dashboard, a sales highlight dashboard that's with the hard-coded filter of Calvin Klein, and then a copy of that dashboard and hard-coding the filter to Levi's, I just need to build one dashboard, call it sales highlight, and have that filtering happening behind the scenes. And again, it's dynamic because it's based on the value of a user attribute, and that can be defined at the user level or at the group level, like we just saw here. So it becomes quite powerful. If I go to the next slide, so if we've done all of this correctly, users will only see the data they're allowed to see, right? As we saw here in the dashboard. But we're also paving the way to exposing data to outside of the organization. Like, first of all, we can streamline the Looker content, as I was saying, one set of visualizations as opposed to copies with different filters. But we can also expose it to our customers, multi-tenant contexts, embedded analytics, and embedded analytics specifically. You can embed, as we all know, we can embed looks and dashboards or even explores into our web app, right? And basically the web app, a user is logging into your web app. They have a particular context, right? They have certain rights, access rights. They have certain privileges. They belong to certain clients, certain groups, etc. You can take all of that, your web app's user context, and pass it to Looker. And basically populate user attribute with those values, and then create even more dynamicity in your filtering. So you could take your web apps context, pass it to Looker, and then it becomes the Looker's user context for dynamic filtering. So again, ultimately, the user is only seeing what they are allowed to see. And if it's well implemented, you're unlocking the capabilities of your data apps. You can monetize your data. You could do quite a bit. Once you have this done correctly, it really opens the potential for more ROI on your Looker instance. Just finally, I just want to show you this flow chart. Basically, this kind of talks about how do you make decisions, your data security decisions, based on the different scenarios, right? So we have two types of users in Looker. We have business users, people who are using Looker to analyze data, but we also have developers, right? Developing in LookML. We can control access to data to developers as well, because within a project, you can dictate this project can see these models, right? So you can already have model level security at the project level, but then in the business user context, you can have, as I showed you before, model level security through model sets and roles. You can have explore or join level security with user attributes and access grants. You can have column level security with the same leveraging the same features, user attributes and access grants. And then if you want to apply role level security, then you're really talking about user specific filters, or what I call dynamic filters, leveraging user attributes and access filters, or the more static filters around SQL, using SQL always having, SQL always where, always filter, and conditionally filter. So this is like a little flowchart to help you decide which security mechanism to use in which scenario. And that was it. Do we have any questions?
Awesome. Thank you very much, Tino. No questions yet, but I'll let people give them a couple minutes to write. I can see a couple people are typing in there currently. Thank you very much for that. That was very, very interesting. And I know everyone will have enjoyed it.
While questions are coming in, I'll just do a couple of shout outs here. So we have some upcoming Datatonic events as well. We're going to be at Google Next in San Francisco in a couple of weeks. We'll be hosting a customer showcase speaking session called Improving the Gaming Metaverse with Hyber, Datatonic, and Gen AI. And during the session, we'll be exploring how we've helped Hyber, the Hyber World, the app is called Hyber World, players rapidly create new Wordles in the gaming metaverse. We use Gen AI for that, so stay tuned for that. Like, we'd love to have you join us. If you're attending Google Next, check us out. Google Next, we won't have a booth, but we will be walking around. Look for our t-shirts. They'll be quite creative, and we'll be walking around, and you can talk to us then. Another quick webinar. We're starting a webinar series in September around Looker, and well, not just Looker, but around Google Cloud. And the first installment is going to be called, we're going to be looking at embedded analytics. It's called Mastering Looker Embedded Analytics for Data Monetization. It'll be a bit of a panel. It'll be with us, Datatonic, Google, and a client of a Looker client called Subscribe. They'll cover their embedded analytics use cases and how they've used Looker to monetize their data. And of course, along with Google, we'll be talking about what the next generation of Looker is going to bring to embedded analytics. So I'll drop this. Do you have the link, Dylan, to this webinar? If you do, you could probably pop it in Slack. If not, I can definitely.
I don't have it, but I can definitely find it.
Yeah. Okay. We'll get that over to everyone. But there is, if you want to register for that, that's on September 12th, usual time, 12 p.m. Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific time. And yeah, so hopefully we see a few of you there as well. And that's it. That's it. And again, just finally, if you want to screen grab these links here, if you liked this content, and Datatonic has written a bunch of content around Looker and Google, feel free to take a look at our website and also our case studies and our blog and our Montreal Analytics blog as well. Lots of good content there.
Awesome. We've had a couple questions come through, so let me cruise through some of these. First one from Marcelo says, "Is it possible to get model rights?" Let me read this. "Is it possible to get model rights based on a SAML group membership where one member can be a member of more than one group, and in turn could give access to more than one models?" So not, I think, about the row level, but just can people inherit access to models from their SAML SSO group memberships from a security point of view?
You can do that. It's not direct like through the models, but basically what you can do is you can set roles to groups. And what you can do is through your SAML, set group membership, and then that group membership will inherit a particular role, and that role will have access to model sets. So it's a bit of a convoluted approach, but the quick answer is yes, it can be done. It's through group memberships, which you can control, I believe, through SAML. I think there is a bit of limitation right now. I don't know if they fixed it, but there was a limitation at one point with Google OAuth and the group memberships there, but that may have been rectified by then. But yes, you can set it up through groups. Groups can be assigned roles, and then roles will have model sets and permission sets.
Awesome. The next one says, "When adding data attribute filters, I've encountered that QA of dashboards will be a bit more complicated for developers of dashboards. Do you have any recommendations for developers who are not an account team, i.e. they're not part of Calvin Klein or they're not part of Levi's, to see data without kind of constantly editing the data attribute in their profile? Kind of any recommendations for what the development flow might look like there from a QA point of view?"
Yeah, that's a good question there. I don't think there's an easy answer to that. I think what you can do is sudo a bit. You can use sudoing. That's not much. That's not much of a time saver beyond changing your user attributes. What you can probably do for QAing purposes is You're going to have to do it's not going to be elegant, but you can copy the dashboard and add that filter, like the filter on whatever, let's say brand name in this case, and do some bit of testing there. There isn't any magic. There's no silver bullet for that one. I don't know, Dylan, if you have a trick up your sleeve there, but I don't think there's much there.
No, I mean, I think having one tab with your user profile open and another tab with the dashboard and just alternating through them, I think I think that's about as good as it can get. Sorry, I think it's about as good as it can get with the Looker UI. I think my selfish plug here is you can run spectacle suites with user attributes either set programmatically or at the suite level. So if you've got 10 important brands and you want to make sure that everything works for all 10 of those brands, you can do that with spectacles. You can either set up 10 suites or set up one and call it by the API and 10 times say, hey, run the SQL validated with Calvin Klein, run the SQL validated with Levi's, run these data tests, all that type of stuff. So a self-interested plug, but I think that is we added that functionality with user attributes for kind of two use cases. One, it plays a key part in our DBT integration, but also on the second part, it is really useful for our embedded customers to test different permutations and making sure that they see the right things and they see the right metrics and all that type of stuff. So that's the other bit there.
Nothing wrong with a selfish plug.
No. And then let's go for a final one. Can we have conditional filters per user? For example, user A always has account 1 filter, user B always has account 2 filter. And I think it's continued. In the brand example, if the person is the manager for Calvin Klein and Levi's, but at the moment they enter in the dashboard, the default one would be Calvin Klein, but he can change it. So I guess the question there is like, can you intertwine dashboard filters with these things? If someone has access to multiple things, can that be set via the access filter?
Well, you can have multiple conditions in an access filter. So that's not a problem per se, but remember that essentially what that access filter is doing is taking, translating that into a where clause, right? So if you can think about it, if you can write it out in the where clause, you could probably reverse engineer it. I say probably because I've not tested it, but you could probably reverse engineer it with a combination of things. But I'd have to test out a few things. But I'll say a tentative yes, because again, like I said, if you can think about it, how it looks in a where clause, you can probably work your way back into the lookml. But I can't be 100% sure of that. But like I said, you can have multiple access filters there. Well, you have multiple conditions in your access filter. So if there's a way to combine those, there's a way to do it. But it's not do this one or do that one. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah, I guess my 2 cents is like there will be some things that are beyond what an access filter can do, and you'll end up kind of just wanting to do some custom liquid stuff in the underlying views. A lot of the time is kind of the extension of that, and so there's like this. I think probably covers 95% of use cases, and then there's just a long tail where you end up going down the liquid rabbit hole and doing some stuff at the view level there.
Yeah, and if it's not about hiding the data at all costs from a particular user, if it's just like, okay, start the filter at start the dashboard at this default filtering, you can add a filter at the dashboard level and actually make it apply it using a user attribute value. You can do that as well. So maybe it's a combo of those things. And then as Dylan said, you can really go down the rabbit hole and use Liquid to apply some custom filtering there as well. Those are good questions, by the way.
Awesome. There's one final one from Simon, but it is slightly longer. And so Simon, I think Dino and I will jump into Slack and maybe have a conversation around that one after the webinar, because it's a good one, but I think it might take us a little bit of time both to read it out and then to answer it, but we'll make sure to come back to that one in Slack. That's going to be it for us today. Dino, big thank you. Awesome presentation, and really glad to have you on the webinar today. And And yeah, big thank you to all the attendees. As I say every time we do this, it's awesome to see the engagement. It's awesome to have everyone join. I'm sure we'll have either Dino or other members of the Datatonic team on again in the near future. And we'll see you all in a couple of weeks to talk DBT clone, which is one of the new DBT commands that we're using a lot for some of our customers. So yeah, Dino, thanks again, and we'll see everyone soon.
Take care, everybody. Thanks for your attention. Thanks a lot.